The dragons came from the mountains when the world was young. They were creatures of fire and storm, with scales harder than any metal and wings that blocked out the sun. For 3,000 years, they ruled everything under the sky. No army could stand against them. No wall could stop them. No king could bargain with them. The elves were the first to fall. They had magic and grace and cities of white stone. The dragons burned it all in a single summer. Those elves who survived ran to the deep forests and hid like frightened animals. They never came out again. The dwarves thought their mountains would protect them. They sealed their great doors and trusted in stone. But dragons are patient. They sat on the peaks and waited. They blocked every entrance. They poisoned every stream that flowed into the mountain. Within 3 generations, the dwarves had forgotten what sunlight looked like. They ate mushrooms and rats and sometimes each other. The orcs chose to serve. They bent their knees and became the dragon's hands in the world below. They gathered tribute and hunted down any who resisted. In return, the dragons let them live. It was survival, but it was not freedom. And then there were the humans. The dragons did not think much about humans at first. They were small creatures with short lives. They had no magic like the elves. They had no great forges like the dwarves. They had no strength like the orcs. They were simply meat that could talk. When the dragons came to claim the human lands, the humans fought. They lost. They fought again. They lost again. City after city fell to dragon fire. Army after army became ash on the wind. The humans retreated, and the dragons followed. The humans retreated again, and still the dragons came. Finally, the dragons grew bored. They had pushed the humans to the edges of the world, to places no other creature wanted. The salt flats where nothing grew. The volcanic wastes where the ground itself could kill. The frozen tundra where winter never ended. These were the Deadlands, and the dragons left the humans there to die. Every few decades, a dragon would fly over the human settlements just to watch them suffer. The great worm Verinthus found this especially amusing. He would circle above their crude villages and laugh at their struggles. He told the other dragons that humans were like insects. Crush one, and 10 more appeared. But they would never be a threat. They would never be anything. Verinthus was wrong. What the dragons did not understand was that humans were built for exactly this kind of hardship. Other races had grown strong in comfort. Humans had grown strong in pain. Every disaster made them harder. Every loss made them smarter. Every death taught them something new. In the salt flats, humans learned to read the wind. Dragons created disturbances in the air when they flew. A trained observer could see these patterns from miles away. The humans began tracking every dragon flight, every hunting route, every territory. They wrote it all down in books made from animal skin, and they passed these books from parent to child. In the volcanic regions, humans studied the dragons themselves. They watched how the creatures moved through fire without harm. They noticed that the same dragons avoided the cold peaks. They tested this knowledge carefully, sending scouts to observe from safe distances. Fire could not hurt a dragon, they learned. But ice could slow one down. In the frozen tundra, humans became masters of survival. They built cities beneath the snow where no dragon could see them. They tamed wolves and used them to hunt in packs. They developed new ways to store food that could last for years. And they created something no other race had ever bothered to make. A written language designed for one purpose, to pass knowledge, perfectly from one generation to the next. The elves had songs and memories. The dwarves had traditions and crafts. But humans had books. Humans had records. Humans had libraries buried so deep that no dragon fire could ever reach them. 20 years after the dragons left them in the Deadlands, humans knew more about dragons than any other race alive. 50 years later, they knew more than the dragons knew about themselves. and they waited. The Great One Varanthus descended on a human village one cold morning, expecting easy sport. He had visited this same settlement 3 times before. Each time, the humans had run and screamed and died in satisfying numbers. He anticipated the same entertainment, thought the village was empty. Every home stood silent. Every fire had been put out days ago. Every human was simply gone, as if they had never existed. Varanthus searched the surrounding lands for hours, but found nothing. The humans had known he was coming. They had read the winds, checked their records, and left before he arrived. He returned to his mountain and told no one what had happened. It was embarrassing. It was strange. But surely it meant nothing. The other dragons continued their rule without concern. They fought among themselves for territory. They slept for decades at a time. They treated the world like their personal hunting ground. They had won so completely that they could not imagine ever losing. Far below, in cities carved from ice and stone, human children learned to read. They studied books their great-grandparents had written. They memorized dragon flight patterns like other children memorized nursery rhymes. They practiced patience like other children practiced games. The dragons ruled the sky. The humans ruled survival. And survival, given enough time, could become something else entirely. 60 years after the dragons abandoned humanity to die in the Deadlands, the elders gathered for what they called the First Council of Survival. They met in a cavern beneath the frozen earth, lit by fires that burned without smoke. Representatives came from every scattered human settlement. Salt farmers who had learned to grow food in poisoned soil. Mountain dwellers who had mapped every dragon territory within 1,000 miles. Ice fishers who could feed entire cities through the endless winter. They had one question to answer. What should humanity do next? The young ones wanted war. They had grown up on stories of burning cities and eaten children. Their blood called for revenge. A warrior named Corvith stood before the council and demanded action. His village had been destroyed just that spring. His mother had died in his arms, burned by dragonfire while trying to shield his baby sister. Both of them had turned to ash while he watched. The elders listened to his pain. They understood it. Many of them carried similar scars. Then they said no, not because they were cowards, not because they had forgotten, but because they had done the math. The eldest among them, a woman named Vera, who had lived through the original exile, asked Corvith a simple question. If every human in every settlement attacked the dragons tomorrow, how many dragons would die? Corvith did not know. Vera gave him a task. Go to the libraries. Study the records. Calculate the answer. Take as long as he needed. Corvith spent 2 years in the deep archives. He read everything. He learned how many dragons existed, where they lived, how they fought. He studied their fire and their claws and their scales that could turn away any blade. He counted human soldiers and human weapons and human supplies. When he finished, he brought his answer to the council. If every human alive attacked the dragons with everything they had, they might kill 3 dragons, maybe 4, and every human would die. Something broke inside Corvith that day, but something else grew in its place. He understood now. Revenge was not about speed. Revenge was about certainty, and certainty required time. He became the first strategos, a word humans invented for a new kind of leader. Not a general who sought glory, not a king who demanded loyalty. A strategos was a planner of generations. He would design the war that his grandchildren's grandchildren would fight. Under Corvith's guidance, humanity adopted a simple doctrine: outlast, outlearn, outbreed. They would not fight the dragons. Not yet. Not for 100 years. Maybe not for 500. Instead, they would prepare. They would grow. They would study. And when they finally struck, they would not fail. The first task was survival itself. Humans spread to every corner of the deadlands that dragons ignored. They developed new ways to farm in impossible conditions. Lichen that grew on volcanic rock. Fish bred to survive in poisoned waters. Grain that could grow beneath the snow. Their population doubled, then doubled again. The second task was knowledge. The Windredders became an official caste. Men and women who spent their entire lives studying dragon movements. They could predict where any dragon would fly a week in advance, sometimes a month. The chroniclers recorded everything in libraries that grew larger every year. Every dragon sighting, every attack pattern, every rumor and legend that might contain useful truth. The third task was the most dangerous. The scale takers died when dragons fought each other. Pieces sometimes fell. Scales shed from old wounds. Bones from ancient battles. Eggshell fragments near abandoned nests. The scale takers risked their lives to collect these materials. They studied them. They learned what dragon scale could do. They discovered that dragon bone held heat better than any other material. They found that certain acids could weaken even the hardest scale. Generations passed. Human children grew up learning patience as a virtue greater than courage. Mothers told their sons and daughters the same story every night. The mountain does not fight the storm. It waits and remains. The dragons notice nothing. Why would they? Humans live for maybe 60 years. Dragons live for thousands. To a dragon, a human generation was like a single afternoon. By the time any dragon checked on the human settlements, everyone who remembered the last visit was already dead. But humans passed their memories down. A grandfather who had seen a dragon attack would tell his daughter exactly what happened. She would write it down. Her son would read it and add it to the great records. His daughter would study those records and see patterns that no single lifetime could reveal. The elves lived long lives, but their memories faded. The dwarves kept traditions, but they had sealed themselves away from the world. The orcs served the dragons and learned nothing. Only humans built a system designed to remember forever. 100 years after the first council, humans knew more about dragons than ever before. 200 years later, they had developed weapons that could theoretically pierce dragon scale. 300 years later, they had tested those weapons in secret. They were almost ready. The dragons still thought of them as insects, small, weak, temporary. They had no idea that the insects had been studying them for 10 generations. That the insects had weapons now. That the insects were counting down the days. Patience was a weapon, and humans had more of it than anyone could imagine. 400 years after the first council of survival, a young strategos named Mira stood before a table covered in maps. She was the 9th person to hold this title. Each one before her had added to the plan. Each one had refined the weapons. Each one had died knowing the work was not finished. Mira would be different. She pointed to a mountain pass in the eastern range. The dragon Sithara had hunted there every spring for as long as anyone could remember. The chroniclers had records going back 11 generations. Every year, the same route. Every year, the same time. Sithara was old and powerful, but she had become lazy. She did not think. She simply did what she had always done. That would be her death. Myra had 60 years of preparation behind this single moment. Her grandmother had chosen the killing ground. Her mother had designed the weapons. Myra herself had calculated every angle, every escape route, every possible way the plan could fail. The trap began with the simplest thing in the world: food. Hunters drove a herd of elk into the pass at exactly the right time. Sithara saw them from miles away. Easy prey, like every spring before. She did not notice the humans hidden in the rocks. She did not see the tunnels carved beneath the ground. She did not smell the oil that coated the massive bolts. Waiting in their launchers, she dove. The first bolt struck her left wing. It was tipped with poison developed over 300 years, made from plants that grew only in volcanic soil. The dragons had pushed humans to those places, never imagining that humans would find weapons there. Sithara screamed and twisted in the air. The second bolt hit her chest. The third took her other wing. She crashed into the narrow pass, too wounded to fly, too confined to use her fire effectively. Humans emerged from the rocks with spears of dragon bone and shields of dragon scale. They had armor forged from materials their great-grandparents had scavenged. They moved in perfect coordination, trained since childhood for this single purpose. Sithara killed 11 of them before she died. The humans considered this an acceptable loss. They had planned for 20 when the dragon finally stopped breathing. The humans did not celebrate. They had too much work to do. They stripped everything useful from her body. Scales, bones, teeth, blood. Then they collapsed the mountain pass with explosives, burying all evidence. They returned to their hidden cities through tunnels that had taken decades to dig. No other dragon would know what had happened. Sithara would simply disappear, and dragons disappeared sometimes. They fought each other. They challenged rivals. They flew into storms they could not escape. One missing dragon meant nothing, but the humans knew. Over the next 50 years, they killed 12 more dragons using the same methods. Different passes, different poisons, different traps, but always the same principle. Study the target for generations. Prepare the ground for decades. Strike once and vanish. Myra died at the age of 73. She had personally overseen 4 successful kills. Her successor continued to work without pause. By now, humans had developed dragon-scale armor that could turn away almost any blow. They had weapons forged from dragon bone that could cut through scales like paper. They had alchemical fires that burned cold, effective against even the greatest fire breathers. They had a communication network using mirrors and smoke that could send messages across continents in hours. And they had allies. The elves came first. Refugees from the dying forests. They had nothing left but their magic and their pride. The humans offered them food and shelter. In return, the elves taught humans to enchant their weapons. A blade that could find the gaps between scales. An arrow that would always fly true. Shields that could absorb DRAGON, FI, or E. Then came the dwarves. Their sealed mountains had become tombs. The survivors who escaped were broken and desperate. The humans offered them purpose. The ancient forges returned to life, now producing weapons designed for a single enemy. Dwarf metallurgy combined with human planning created tools of terrifying effectiveness. The orcs were harder to reach. Most still served the dragons. But some remembered the old days, before they had bent the knee. Human agents found these distant. They offered them something the dragons never had: respect. Orc strength combined with human strategy made the strike teams even deadlier. Still, the humans were careful. They killed only isolated dragons. They targeted the old ones, the careless ones, the ones who had grown confident in their immortality. They never attacked nesting grounds or gathering sites where multiple dragons might be present. The dragons began to notice the missing. But they had no explanation. Dragons did not die to lesser creatures. Dragons did not fall to traps. The great Wyrms blamed each other for the disappearances. Old feuds erupted into new conflicts. Exactly as the humans had planned. 200 years after that first kill in the mountain pass, humans had eliminated 10% of the dragon population. The dragons still did not know where the humans actually lived. The hidden cities remained hidden. The deep libraries remained untouched. The strategos of that era, a man named Orin, who walked with a cane forged from dragon bone, knew the secret could not last forever. Sooner or later, the dragons would realize what was happening. They would unite against the common threat. Orin smiled when he thought about this. "Let them come," he said. "We have been waiting." The great worm Keltharion was older than any living thing on the continent. He remembered when the world had no cities. He remembered when dragons had ruled without question or rival. For 1,000 years, he had slept more than he had woken, confident that nothing could threaten his kind. The disappearances changed that. 1 missing dragon was nothing. 10 was strange. 50 was impossible. And still they vanished, one by one, with no explanation. The younger dragons blamed each other. The older ones whispered about a curse or a plague. But Keltharion knew the truth. Someone was hunting them. He gathered every dragon who would answer his call. Nearly 300 came, filling the sky with their wings. It was the largest gathering in a millennium. Keltharion told them what they faced. An enemy they could not see, striking from shadows, using weapons that should not exist. The humans, some laughed. The insects from the Deadlands? Yes, Keltharion said. The insects. His plan was simple. Find every human settlement and burn it to glass. Leave nothing alive. End the threat forever. The dragons flew in waves across the continent. They descended on every place where humans might hide. Villages in the salt flats. Camps in the volcanic waste. Settlements on the frozen tundra. Every single one was empty. The Windredders had seen them coming a week in advance. The humans had packed their essential belongings, collapsed their tunnels, and vanished into hiding places prepared for exactly this moment. The dragons burned empty buildings and dead campfires. They found no living human anywhere. Keltharion grew frustrated, then furious. His army scattered across the land, searching for any sign of their prey. And that was when the humans struck back. Small teams emerged from hidden positions and attacked isolated dragons. A group of 3 here, a patrol of 2 there. The humans used weapons the dragons had never seen before. Bolts that exploded on impact. Poisons that froze the blood. Blades enchanted by elvish magic to find every weakness in a dragon's scales. In 1 month, the dragons lost 40 more of their number. They had killed perhaps 200 humans in return. But humans were many. Dragons were few. Keltharion called his remaining forces back. He could not win a scattered war. He needed to draw the humans out, to force them into a single battle where dragon strength would matter. His scouts found what they were looking for, a city called Last Haven, built into a frozen cliff face. It was the largest human settlement they had ever discovered. Smoke rose from hidden vents. Lights flickered in carved windows. This was not an empty trap. This was a home. Keltharion brought every dragon he could gather. 212 flew toward Lost Haven under his command. It would be the greatest attack since the original exile. Nothing could survive it. The humans were waiting. The entrance to the valley had been designed over 100 years. The walls were too narrow for dragons to fly side by side. The cliffs blocked the wind that dragons needed for maneuverability. The ground was covered with carefully placed obstacles that limited movement. The dragons entered anyway. They had numbers and fire and rage. What did humans have? The answer came in waves. Ballistae hidden in the cliff face launched bolts the size of trees. Each one carried alchemical frost that spread on impact, grounding any dragon it touched. Shield walls of soldiers in dragon-scale armor held the narrow passes. Elvish mages called down storms that made flight dangerous even for the greatest wyrms. Dwarven engineers triggered explosions that brought avalanches down on wings and tails. And through it all, human soldiers fought with weapons forged from the bodies of their enemy. Dragonbone spears punched through scales that had turned away 1,000 lesser blades. Dragon-tooth arrows found eyes and joints and the soft places beneath the wings. Caltharion pushed through the chaos, killing humans by the dozen. He reached the main gate of Last Haven, determined to burn the city from its core. A single woman stood before him. She was old and scarred, and held a lance that glowed with cold blue light. Her name was Shira, and she was the 14th Strategos. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Caltharion laughed. One human? Against him? Shira did not answer. She simply waited. The great worm attacked. His fire filled the pass with heat that should have melted stone. But Shira's armor, forged by dwarves from dragon scale and enchanted by elves with ancient spells, held. She stepped through the flames like they were morning mist. Her lance was made from the spine of the first dragon ever killed by human hands. 400 years of hatred had been poured into its creation. Every technique, every enchantment, every drop of knowledge that humanity had gathered was focused in that single weapon. She threw it. The lance punched through Caltharion's chest and pinned his heart to the frozen ground. Behind him, he died with confusion in his ancient eyes. He still did not understand how insects could kill a god. The remaining dragons broke. Some fled and were never seen again. Some surrendered and were given territories far from any human settlement, monitored and contained forever. Some fought to the death and got exactly what they wanted. When the battle ended, humans stood in a graveyard of dragon corpses. They had lost 4,000 soldiers. The dragons had lost their world. The elves and dwarves emerged from the shadows where they had waited. They looked at the humans with something between respect and fear. How had they done this? How had the weakest race in the world destroyed the strongest? Shira cleaned her lance and answered without pride. We remembered, she said. Every burned village, every eaten child, every 1,000 years of suffering. We wrote it all down, and we passed it on, and we made our hatred patient. The dragons had ruled the sky for 3,000 years. They had treated that time as proof of their eternal power. The humans had used every single day of those 3,000 years to prepare. Patience was the deadliest weapon of all. And no one was more patient than a species that knew, with absolute certainty, that they would have their revenge. The age of dragons was over. The age of humans had just begun.